everybody, and welcome to the Total Soccer Show. My name is Taylor Rockwell, and we've got an MLS Cup final to preview. It's Miami hosting Vancouver, and it's a battle of designated players, quality squad members, debutante managers. What a time to be alive. To help paint the picture of how we got to this point in the season, I'm joined by two fine friends. Up first, it's a man who knows that if you're going to have a super sub, it's nice if it's Ryan Gauld. It's Joe Lowry. Hello, Joe.
That's a fundamental principle of life, I think. I don't think you could find a person on the street that once you explain the situation to them in detail. So Ryan Gauld, they called him the Scottish Messi. Eventually Vancouver, they needed a 10 for years. They went out and signed him. Oh, by the way, the 10 is an attacking midfielder, playmaker type. They signed him. They brought him into the team. He was the working man's MVP. He gets injured. Now all of a sudden he's back healthy enough to play 30 minutes off the bench. Who wouldn't want that guy? Every single person on the street, maybe except for British people, I guess. I don't know. We won't count them. They would say, yes, I want that. Taylor, fundamental life principle. Nailed it.
So do we have the Scottish Messi versus the Argentine Messi, or is it just the Scottish Messi versus Messi?
Yeah, I think just the Scottish Messi versus Messi until Brendan Aronson pops out and we've got the Medford Messi, Which, really, I think the takeaway here is we should just stop calling people fill-in-the-blank place name Messi. That's on me. All
right. Can we still call him Lionel Messi, or is it just Messi from now on?
Yeah, just Messi. Yeah, he is a victim of the rule.
All right, a man who is not a mononym, rounding out the crew today as ever, a man who sneakily did score against NYCFC this past weekend, but Miami put in so many that no one seemed to notice. It's Jeff Reuter. Hello, Jeff.
Yeah, I mean, and it's hard too, but like you run around, you do your best, you make that good off-ball run, you get that tap in, and then no one cares, man. Everyone's running over, and I'm not wearing pink. That's the hard part too. I wore the wrong shirt. And, it's embarrassing, but like
thereafter,
yeah. But the goal call, I will say, the call to my goal had 5 different product placements for Apple products, which is now a hallmark of the coverage, and just blessed. So thankful to be associated. Right. Yeah. Like there was one goal call where it was like Javier Mascherano, that notification on his watch. It was the loud decibel setting, whatever, and then it cut to his watch and it's not an Apple Watch. It is a different brand of watch. And it was just like, oh.
Just AI superimposed. They're just putting an Apple Watch in
hovering
place,
over it. Like the graphics behind the goal. Yeah, perfect. They'll get that.
Do both of you have Apple Watches?
I actually do.
Of product placement?
I do, yeah.
I do not.
Okay. I was just curious, what is the least helpful time you've gotten one of those loud noise settings? I get them when one of my daughters loses their minds. That's always a fun one. And I got
yes, Apple, I know. I'm aware. I'm in the trenches.
Yeah, it was like, thank you, Apple, for telling me that my 2-year-old screaming 1 inch from my face is loud. My ringing ears and hurting brain also told me that. Jeff, can you relate? No?
The alternative I've got for you is driving in a quiet car alone with my window down and my arm over the side of it. And if there's no music playing, it'll still say, "Oh, it's too loud, quiet." And I'm just I'm trying to relax. And now
Wind in the ocean? Apparently I had it in the ocean and it went off. Who knew that the ocean was that loud? Anyway, we're not here to talk about decibels and watches and product placement. Maybe we should be. Instead, we're here to talk about the 2025 MLS Cup final and previewing it accordingly. We're going to try to take a lengthier look. We will get into some of the tactics, some of the individual matchups later on in the show. But I always think when we come to the end of the season, it's nice to look back and kind of figure out how these teams got to this point, how they were kind of structured to begin with, how they grew along the way, changes from the manager, all that good stuff. Since Inter Miami will be hosting, since they are the higher-seeded team, let's start with them, shall we? So last season ends not quite the way I think they were picturing it would end, with a first-round loss to Atlanta in the playoffs. From there, Jeff, how do we feel like they go about preparing for this season? Is there a sort of looking at ourselves in the cold light of day moment, or is there, nope, doubling down, continuing to go for it, all is right, and we're going to figure this out?
Yeah, in some ways, this was about as all-in as any MLS team has ever gone on any individual season in history, with the idea that this team is built to win that year's MLS Cup. I think last year what Miami had seen after they had lost to Atlanta was, one, Tomas Avila's laying in the box as a cross is going in that eventually gets headed in to eliminate them. So that's not a good thing to see. But I think that they also saw that they couldn't really commit to what was going to be working best with the aging personnel that they had. And so the trade-offs that they made with their squad turnover in the offseason were getting more technical. And so in all areas of the field, they had someone who knew how to settle the ball and to get out of tight areas as they're getting converged. Ideally, theoretically, we'll get there, and a little less physical, so that they were slower. They couldn't move with some of the same freedoms in all phases. And, there were parts of it that really did work, but there were parts of it that did seem to strain them. You looked at the early part of the season, and it was pretty clear that they weren't getting great schooling from Javier Mascherano, a first-time club head coach, and they were dropping results. And, once they had crashed out of the CONCACAF Champions Cup in the knockout bracket, the bottom really started to fall out. Teams were starting to call them the Pink Phony Club, and they took it very personally. And, their owners were trying to defend their honor on Instagram in the comment section, which is always a good sign about how a club is working. That. Yeah. And then they lose to Orlando in similar fashion. But then it starts to turn around. They kind of remember, wait, we do have more talent than pretty much anyone we face. We should maybe try using that talent. And that's when they get more technical. They bring in Rodrigo de Paul for another figure to kind of integrate and eventually start to kind of find what their mojo looks like.
I love, Jeff, your point about them getting a bit more technical. And I'll even broaden it out. I think one thing that's gone underrated about Miami this year is that they just have better players than they did last year. I know in DePaul's case it seems obvious, and the midfield is an obvious area to look when you look for upgrades. I would rather, hot take, have Rodrigo de Paul starting in MLS Cup than Federico Redondo or Benjamin Kramaski or Matty Rojas, who started in that must-win game for Miami in the playoffs against Atlanta last year. That's obvious. But it's not just him. You can look at every line of the field except goalkeeper, where they've gotten worse. Inexplicably worse, by the way. But you look through the rest of the outfield lines. In the defense, you have Noah Allen and Maxi Falcone starting in the middle of the back line. Max Falcon himself. That is undoubtedly a better center back pairing than Toto Aviles, Mr. Lay on the turf himself, and David Martinez, who started in the middle of the back line for them last year. That's an upgrade. Ian Frey, although he's been injured, we'll see if he's healthy enough to start MLS Cup, I don't know, is better than Marcelo Wagan, who started towards the end of last season and really was a guy who ate up a lot of minutes last year. So you've upgraded clearly in the back line, which was the biggest need for Miami. They were wretched against the ball last year for far too much of the year. Granted, they place more responsibility on their defenders than most teams do because of how little their attacking players have tended to defend. But they've gotten better in the back line. They got better in midfield. I think they got better in the attack as well. I know Diego Gomez played a lot of games for them on the left wing last year, and Gomez is a good player. Goes off to Brighton for a club record fee, is somebody who's going to have a long, successful career for club and country. But I think the attack is at least more balanced. At minimum, it's more balanced. And at maximum, it's just more talented. Tadio Allende has been a really useful player for them on the right wing. And then you've had Suarez be able to float more towards the left and Messi more towards the middle. Or now that Suarez is on the bench, Matteo Savetti looks like he's going to make them a lot of money in the next couple of years. He looks like a really, really good young player who is well-rounded without any real holes in his game. I think this roster has just gotten better, and it all flies under the radar because so much of the mainstream Barcelona story, and we do this too, right, is about the stars and how the stars are performing with probably not quite enough attention paid to, well, who are these underpaid guys who are gluing them all together? And outside of DePaul, who's not an underpaid guy, but most of these other guys aren't making a ton of money in the grand scheme of MLS. And they have been clear upgrades from last year. So I think Miami deserves credit for identifying their weaknesses, obvious for the most part, but really for executing those well, for nailing a lot of these moves. I do not think they are here. I do not think they are clear favorites on Saturday without a lot of those moves coming together.
Joe, how many of those moves do you feel like have been deliberate, like we're replacing this player with this player and it will be an upgrade, versus we need to clear some level of like debt off the books, we need to have some level of flexibility, so we're getting rid of this guy and hopefully this dude coming in can play that role? Like, how much of it has been very organic and logical versus scattershot and maybe slightly fortunate?
I mean, there's a little bit of both with Miami, right? And even with the fortunate side of things, you think about getting DePaul is pretty fortunate. Not a lot of other MLS clubs probably could have attracted him in the way that they did. That's still a lot of legwork, right? I mean, we talk about Messi choosing Miami. Messi doesn't choose Miami if Jorge Mas isn't like putting in work, flying to Barcelona, poor guy, right? Flying to Barcelona and meeting with him, like laying the groundwork. So Miami have laid the groundwork to be able to be fortunate, if that makes sense. They have kind of made their own luck in that way. But I think they deserve a lot of credit for the signings that they made. I think also Chris Henderson deserves a lot of credit for the signings that they've made. A few other folks in that front office. Now Henderson's obviously at Atlanta United. But he left them in a pretty good spot salary cap-wise. And the other folks that they do have in that front office who know how MLS roster rules work have done a pretty darn good job. So I think it was easy to look at Toto Aviles and say this guy shouldn't get any more minutes for us. So there's varying levels of credit here. But I think by and large, there were clear areas of need that they saw could be upgraded on. They had a pretty healthy salary cap situation. And that's how these upgrades come together.
Let's say they end up winning the whole thing, Jeff. Do you put an asterisk next to it at all for the way they've gone about building this roster and some of the maybe contentions, theories, drama around the acquisitions and how compliant they are with roster rules? Or is it just, they built the team they built, MLS says it's fine, so it's fine?
Yeah, it's more that, I think. I think it's more MLS said they could, so they did. And we'll see what other teams can try their own version of this kind of new Miami math to make their books work, right? And I think some of that is also Miami has been very good for the league the last few years because Miami is something that people do want to engage with and talk about. They have been the best storyline generators in Major League Soccer over the last 2.5 years to a scale that we didn't really have since, I don't know, Beckham was at the Galaxy, right? And I think that the league needs that. So I think part of that is where the conspiracies come in, is like, okay, you look like the golden child. You're the one that is getting pushed forward. Therefore, we're allowing you a fourth designated player, or sign players to contract extensions like Jordi Alba, and then they can retire, and suddenly we're just going to tear up that contract and pretend it never happened, right? Some of these things are really silly. Some of these things just don't really make sense within the framework of MLS that we knew, but I don't think it would be fair to give them an asterisk because I think they have also had to make some tough trade-offs. Some of this is self-inflicted. I almost wonder if they're trying to set this difficulty mode to like extra hard or something by making sure that they don't have an MLS starting goalkeeper, right? And having Drake Callender traded mid-season when he would have been such an upgrade over Oscar Ustari is not a thing that most MLS teams would do, but again, I think that it just goes back to what has made the season so fascinating for Miami is they're not doing this in a way that we've seen other teams do it. But I don't think that makes it wrong. And I think that when we look back on them in 5-10 years, if MLS does make the evolutions, either they're, with the stronger foothold in the transfer market that'll come from the schedule change or some knock-on changes to the league, I think we might look at them more as showing where the league needed to go. And therefore the league changed its rules that more teams could do things like Inter Miami has been doing it this year, rather than the alternative, which is that, it was this one-off juggernaut that was breaking all the rules and then everyone retired and now the league is back to what it was before.
So we have a team that's already somewhat strong. We add to it in myriad ways to make them even stronger. If we're building our consensus 3 best signings for Inter Miami this season, is Rodrigo De Paul number 1?
He's certainly on the list. I haven't thought about it in this way, I suppose. I would put De Paul in the top 3. I would put Silvetti in the top 3.
Yeah.
And I'm not entirely sure who that last player is, to be totally honest with you. I mean, I think they've had a lot of good signings who've done enough. And I mentioned a lot of players who I think have been upgrades for them. But I don't know if it is a Falcone or if it is I don't know. It's tricky. I guess DePaul certainly is in that 3.
Do you want to do DePaul, Silvetti, and then it might sound like a cop-out, but I don't think it is because it tells the story. Is it just kind of squad and squad depth at that?
I guess I missed an obvious one. It's got to be Allende, right? With how productive he's been for this team in the attack. That's an obvious one for sure.
And then how critical has Javier Mascherano been in terms of the sauce that we're cooking up here? Because on the one hand, has a lot of existing familiarity with some of these key performers, doesn't have the track record at club level, certainly, has only managed Argentina at youth levels coming into this one, but does now have the team in an MLS Cup final and has navigated a fairly tricky season. It's been a very busy season for them. You've got CONCACAF Champions Cup, they make the semifinals. You've got Leagues Cup final. You've got the Club World Cup where they make the knockout stages. So it does feel like he has navigated a lot of different fixtures in a lot of different ways with a lot of different personnel. How much credit are we giving him for the run they've made and where they've gotten?
Yeah, not just a busy season, the busiest season ever in MLS. Miami have played more games now than any MLS team has ever played. They will have played 58 by the time the opening whistle is blown on Saturday. That's a record. So MLS teams in general are playing more games now than ever before. Miami are leading that charge. I think Mascherano has done a good job. I'm not necessarily willing to go more than that, but I think he's done well this season, which is a credit to him, right? A lot of people, myself included, were critical when Miami hired him because it was clearly a Messi higher. And that's fine. That's part of having Messi on your team, and clearly it was worth it. But that's what it was. We don't need to talk around that. It was Messi wanting Javier Mascherano to be coaching this team because he's someone he knows, has played with many, many times, and has a rapport with. There aren't that many people that are even lightly qualified for a role like this, like Mascherano was. I think most of the job of being Inter Miami manager is ego massaging, right? Is controlling the players enough, trying to make sure that there are massive divides in the locker room, and managing personalities more than managing tactics. Because let's face it, there's only so much you can do tactically with a team that has Messi, Busquets, Suarez, and Alba on it. At the same time, I do think Mascherano has done a pretty good job tactically, especially in the business end of the season when it comes to dropping Suarez from the 11 after his suspension. I think that's made this team look more dangerous. I mean, they've won 3 straight games by 4 goals without Suarez in the team. So I think things are going fine on that front. And defensively, I think he's drawn up some good game plans in the postseason. So I think Mascherano has done a good job. Is he the reason that they're here? Of course not. Is he one of the 4 reasons that they're here? No, of course not. I mean, he's on the list somewhere. But most of the reasons are the fact that they have the best player of all time, the best player MLS has ever seen by a country mile, who's having the best MLS season ever by a single player by a country mile, Messi, by the way. He's got 9 more goal contributions across regular season and playoffs this year than Carlos Vela did in his great season back in 2019 for LAFC. Vela played 1 more game. I know the playoff format has expanded since then. Vela took an extra game to have 9 fewer goal contributions. Like, Messi is the best player MLS has seen, and this version of Messi is the best player, the best of Messi that we've seen in MLS. So Mascherano's on the list. He's just behind a lot of other things. And that's okay. That's just what it is.
Jeff, do you concur with the hot take that Mascherano good, Messi great?
Yeah, I do, and I think that Joe laid out the hot take quite well, where, I think it is a mix of 2 things. I think it is a mix of recognizing that this attack flows better without Luis Suarez in it. Like Joe said, there's only so much tactically you can do with all 4 of them on the field with Alba and Busquets as well as Messi. And I think it was the easiest change to make because it gave the most knock-on benefits to Messi. And we talked about this last week, but for people who are tuning in as the MLS Cup preview, part of what's working so well about not having Luis Suarez is that Suarez and Messi at this stage of their careers tend to try to get into very similar spaces and don't vary their movement in the final third enough off of each other, especially once you get towards the box, where sometimes it was getting cluttered, sometimes it was funneling to 2 shot takers, whatever, there wasn't enough spacing. Opponents were able to just kind of glom onto these 2 aging South Americans and then, try to at least keep them at bay until they would eventually get their goal. But it was really slowing down Miami. But to be able to have Silvetti and then to have Tadeo Allende playing off of Messi as your front 3, well, now there's more dynamism, now there's more off-ball movement, now there's more spacing where the central channel is more open for Messi to do what he wants to do, and I don't think that that's something that can happen with Luis Suarez in the lineup. So that's something I think Mascherano deserves credit for, is actually being willing to make that change. I think that the other thing, and Joe alluded to this too, it's just like, if Mascherano was told you will get the full year no matter what by ownership, then he's going to come in with full relaxation in the sense that the next game isn't my last game, unless it's this game, unless it's MLS Cup, right? But like, so long as I get to MLS Cup, so long as we stay advancing, I can take the temperature down. And I've played in Champions League finals. I've played in World Cups. I'm not stressed about these games in the same way that some of the guys in my locker room are. So not to like diminish it, but it's the same sort of thing that we're going to get to with Thomas Muller in Vancouver, which is this sort of like, hey, you'll survive this. Now, how are you going to enjoy it, right? And I think that that's something that he can bring in, is that sort of perspective. And I don't know if they were getting that last year with Tata Martino, especially with what we knew after the fact, where he was just constantly in his head about whether or not he would even be back in 2025. And ultimately, of course, he's not. So I think that that is a very crucial change in tone in the locker room that would go a long way for a pressure cooker environment like Inter Miami has been since they signed Lionel Messi.
All right, that is the table set on Inter Miami. We'll take a break. We'll come back and we'll talk the Vancouver Whitecaps. Back soon. Welcome back, everybody. To the West we go, where Joe and Jeff already are. Sort of. Jeff, are you in the West? Would you consider yourself out there?
It's the Mississippi,
in the
right? That's just how America is cut. It's like East is Mississippi, East, right? I think we just use the river, and I am on the other side of the river.
I like it.
There we go. You other-siders. All right, let's talk Vancouver, shall we? Who are also other-siders in terms of that border. They have had an interesting season. They've had a consistent season, but it didn't always necessarily look like it was going to be that way. New coach, new acquisitions, but here they are in the final. Jeff, the opening question about this season is how much of this season is predicated on decisions and actions of previous seasons?
Yeah, I think that we talk about with Miami that this has just been building for 2.5 years. But I think for Vancouver, they're more showing that there is still value in kind of those finer appreciative details of MLS squad building and kind of maximizing the margins, so to business speak. When you look at Vancouver compared to last year, a lot of the players are the same. And there's an obvious German headliner that has changed. But I think that when you look at the core, the players that really have driven this Whitecaps team to be one of the most entertaining teams, not just one of the most effective teams this year, is it's a group of players that are really used to playing alongside each other. And there is some moments of cohesion that really you can't just build in 6 months. It does take repeated years of, struggles and then triumphs as well. And I think that when you look at this core, you also have to say that there's just been some really, really good squad building work done over the last 5-6 years or so. When you think of getting Sebastian Berhalter from the Columbus Crew for $50,000 of GAM, the minimum amount MLS allows you to trade, by the way, with another $50,000 of performance incentives. I'm pretty sure he's cleared that. You get Tristan Blackman, who wins Defender of the Year on expansion draft day, when Charlotte FC decides to flip him for like $500,000 of GAM. And bring him in instead of keeping like a foundational domestic defender. And then Brian White, of course, coming over for $400,000 for the Red Bulls. They have one of the best spines in Major League Soccer, and they assembled it for less than $1 million of GAM. I just think that that's like tremendous squad building. But it also is, with the constraints that the Vancouver Whitecaps have under their ownership model, with Greg Kerfoot leading as kind of chairman, and how they don't want to spend, or how they never spent the transfer windfall that they got from Alphonso Davies directly into the first team when they sold him to Bayern Munich. You have to sometimes be a little more clever. You have to really stress over those kind of down squad, quote, quote, decisions more than a team like Miami might. If you have a lot of money, look at Atlanta United. You might just spend it on, and try to buy your way out of problems. And I think Vancouver has tried to play their way out of problems. And I think that now when you look, you see it with the next man up mentality. When their center backs continue to get injured, there are players who are really willing to change their positions, play as a center back if they're more of a fullback or a midfielder, but do the hard work because it's best for the team. Everyone is bought in a way that I think just is really a credit to some cohesion. There's a lot of similarities you could find to like the 2023 Columbus Crew story, I think, actually, just with some very different players and a different accent for the domestic core of them.
Joe, how much credit are you giving Jesper Sorensen, their, I guess, not new manager at this point, but new coming into the season, for that cohesion and that consistency?
A ton. And people know, Jeff, you and I talked about this last week. We both voted for Jesper Sorensen as Coach of the Year. I think he very clearly had the highest impact. When you look at Vancouver, yeah, they've had some good pieces, right? They've had some pieces that have helped them be sort of a middle-tier Western Conference team. At the same time, since their chief soccer officer, Axel Schuster, was hired in November of 2019, this is not a team that had finished higher than 6th in the West before. This has not been a very good MLS team, with a lot of the same players, to Jeff's point, while also recognizing that there's talent in those players. Jesper Sorensen comes in, and it takes them barely any time at all to become a team that looks like one of the 2 or 3 best in Major League Soccer. They end the season with the best expected goal differential in the league. They win the Canadian Championship this year, which is not a super impressive accomplishment, but it adds more games to the schedule. They make the run past into Miami. We should know they beat Miami in both of their 2 legs in the CONCACAF Champions Cup semifinals. And they make the run all the way to the final, where they got absolutely obliterated in their darkest moment of the season. We should be clear about that. But outside of that game, that final, they've been excellent all year long, in spite of some incredibly difficult circumstances that I think started when Sorensen was handed a roster that was fine but not great. That also started when it sounded like the Whitecaps are going to be sold. And not that I heard anything about relocation, but there were people sort of concerned about that. This was a bad situation for Vancouver, and Sorensen comes in, and almost overnight, this team becomes a really, really dangerous team. And it's funny because they get some early red card luck going their way at the start of the season, so it was a little hard to tell if it was real or not, but they're also making the CONCACAF run at the same time. And I talked to Sorensen for Backheel earlier on this year, and he talked about it as, I thought it was going to take months for us to become a good team. It didn't take months for this team to become a good team. And he finally believed that was true when they beat Miami and booked their spot in the final in CONCACAF. He's like, oh, those were the games where it became clear to me that this can be something special. And he was right. I mean, he was 100% right. Jeff, I love the Columbus Crew 2023 shot when Nancy comes in that season, because a lot of the players were already there in Columbus. and Nancy takes a Morera and moves him from right back to right center back. And Nancy takes a Yayaboa and takes him from a left winger to a left wing back. And all of a sudden, players are in positions that seem to suit them better in a clear style of play that they just didn't have before. And Sorensen has very clearly introduced a style of play that's built on control. They build from the back. They control possession with a 3-2 base in that structure, that 3-2-5 that we talk about all the time. They press aggressively. They're one of the most aggressive pressing teams in MLS, but they're not all-out press all the time. The style is clear. The upgrades in personnel are clear. Not in that they've upgraded their roster necessarily, which I suppose they did through Thomas Muller, and maybe we'll talk about him more later. But for most of the season, they didn't really massively upgrade the roster in any way that you could identify. They returned the 12th most minutes, 12th most highest share of minutes from last year to this year. Sorensen has just made this team better. I know I'm usually the coaches don't matter as much as we think guy. I think in Vancouver's case, there's a lot of evidence that points to Sorensen being a coach that really matters a lot. And I think should be a very, very highly desired candidate for any team around the world, most teams around the world, who are looking for a manager. Let's hope Vancouver can keep it.
Jeff, you were nodding that whole time. Anything else to add about the brilliance of Jesper Sorensen?
Yeah, I mean, it's dovetailing, like our two kind of initial points. I think that a lot of players got better under him. And I think that's a testament to actually having maybe better down squad marching orders, and the idea that it's not just like Vanni Sartini maybe was really fixated on how do we get the most out of Ryan Gold and Brian White. And I would say that maybe Brian White is the only one of that core who didn't demonstrably look a lot better in 2025 than past seasons, and injuries had something to do with that. He struggled to consistently get more than a dozen games in a row on the field, and strikers are all about that consistency. But I think when you look specifically at like Sebastian Berhalter, who by the end of last year was a bona fide starting number 8 in Major League Soccer. Like he had already gotten to the point where he had, worked on his agility, he had worked on his decision making, his ball control, his long distribution, where he was a viable starter for Vanni Sartini. But under Sorensen, he has become the central hub of possession. He has become so much more confident on the ball. He's also been more confident situationally of seeing himself as a vital part of a midfield instead of just kind of a supplemental part of a good engine room, right? Like the idea that a lot more hinges on how well he performs, and he relishes in it. You see it with how he riles up fans when he's playing at home. You see it with how he isn't afraid to kind of go chest to chest with an opponent, whether it is for club or now for country as well, having played himself into the U.S. men's national team as well under Mauricio Pochettino. I just think that you look at that, and I don't know if that progress happens if it's not for Jesper Sorensen. Then you throw in the fact that like Tate Johnson comes in and immediately is a starting level MLS fullback, right? You look at Jaden Nelson and Emmanuel Sabi in the seasons that they've had playing, relishing kind of being those chaos merchants out wide who also do get their looks in the box and are able to contribute to the box score. Like I think everyone's bought in just in such a way because they have a coach who believes in their talents and is bringing it out. It's good coaching. It's good talent ID.
Yeah, 100%. I love, Jeff, that you brought in the depth of this team, and you've talked about the down roster stuff. They've needed that down roster stuff this year because they have been absolutely obliterated by injuries. I think I've caught myself over and over again all year long. You think about the Gauld injury first, and he's basically missed the entire season. I know we talked about him in the intro. He's going to play a role in MLS Cup. I don't imagine it's going to be a huge role. I mean, maybe I'll sound silly for that, but he's not going to start in MLS Cup. I'd be shocked if that happened. He's basically missed their entire season. You think about Ranko Veselinovic going down over the summer, Blackman missing time over the summer, them signing 2 center backs in the summer who both have been injured and effectively non-factors for them. Sam Adekugbe, one of the higher paid left backs in the league, going down injured, not a factor this season. You run through the list of guys. Brian White missing time, Danny Rios missing time. I mean, it's a long list. And it hasn't mattered. They still were the best team in the Western Conference based off of expected goal differential all year long. They played 17 players, at least 1,000 minutes in the regular season this year. Miami played 15. Like they have been deep because they've had to be. But that talent has also impressed along the way. I did not think, truly, in my heart of hearts, that Vancouver would continue to progress with all these injuries. I kept waiting for the bottom to fall out, and it just never did, which is such an impressive thing for this team. They faced more adversity in that way than Miami have, and it is mind-bogglingly impressive to me what Vancouver have done. And as long as they keep Sorensen around, it looks sustainable for beyond this year.
Joe, how big of a role have Academy graduates and Vancouver Whitecaps 2 players played? How big of a role have they had in keeping that bottom from falling out?
Not a huge role, right? I mean, they brought in some younger academy sort of players, and I'll admit, at least relative to a lot of the American MLS teams, I'm not intimately familiar with the Vancouver Academy. But a lot of this has been guys that they've brought in from around the landscape, right? Seb Berhalter was not an academy guy for them. They picked him off the scrap heap around MLS, right? You look through the list, and a lot of it is repurposed guys they have had some young players like Baldwall has come in and played minutes for them in the attack. They've had a couple
Ali
of
Ahmed
others.
has been the most relevant example, I'd say. Ali Ahmed gets starts. But other than that, to Joe's point, it's not en masse, right? Like it's not 5-10 guys who are picking up 400 minutes each.
Yeah, 100%. And Ahmed had some experience. He's from Toronto too, right? There it is. I found it.
Right.
So, to answer your question, not a lot, I suppose.
All right. Then, second part of the question, how much of a role has Thomas Muller played in keeping the bottom from falling out for Vancouver this season?
A tremendous amount. And this goes back to the point from the first segment about someone who's been there, right? And he has been big on these atmospheres. Like, what we want is another game. All we're playing for right now is another game. We're not playing because our seasons or our lives depend on it. We just want to keep playing soccer, right? And I think that sort of like grounding can only work if it comes from the right voice. Otherwise, you just sound like you don't care, right? Like, and I think that there are a lot of peers that you would look at and you don't want to hear that from. But I think from him, it's because he also plays with that sort of. It's not him saying, like, we want to play for another game, but you're doing the hard work and I'm just going to come in for tap-ins and penalty kicks, right? Like, he's really leading the press when he's on the field. He's really, like, trying to shield the ball on the end line to go out for Takaoka to take goal kicks, right? Like, he is throwing his body on the line against LAFC in a way to ensure that their season doesn't go off the tracks. And I think that a lot of us... Like, I'll just speak from my example. Like, my when he signed, it was right around the same time where we had Sung Hyung Min and we had Rodrigo de Paul coming in. And I think we looked at Thomas Muller and we had a little bit less clarity on what he had to bring in terms of what was left from his final season in Europe, as it turned out. He was really rotated out under Vincent Kompany. He wasn't getting his same looks. He also wasn't getting his same sort of goal contributions based on the looks that he did have. He was underperforming his XG in a way that we hadn't seen him do in over a decade. But I think that when you factor for the change in game state, the change in MLS defending compared to German defending, to put it very nicely, you can recognize where he's going to have more time, find more space, and also just have more joy. And I think that that's something we're seeing with a lot of international stars coming to Major League Soccer over the last 5 years, is they really seem to enjoy coming here and the lifestyle changes and the freedoms and leaning into it if they're bought into the project as well. And I think that Muller is another one of these really good examples of a player who came in, specifically chose Vancouver because he liked their style of play. He liked what he saw during their Champions Cup run. He liked what he saw from the first half of the MLS season and said, that's a style of play I want. And the more I read about the city, the more I hear about it. I know that everyone wants to think that there's like this great story of Alphonso Davies, sitting him down and say, hey, carry on my legacy at my boyhood club. It doesn't sound like that happened. I think Muller has been pretty quick to just be like, yeah, I checked with him to make sure that it wasn't like a terrible decision, but no, this was very much Muller and his people identified this project as one that would be a good fit for him, and he has shown up 100% of the way, and it has gone so far to get over that like crushing mid-season Champions Cup result and turn it into but who cares, it's a different team now. And I think that they'll only be more confident, including the idea of rematching against a team that already faced them home and away during that cup run.
I'll admit I was a little skeptical. Oh, well, let me actually say this differently. I'll admit I'm a fool. Now let me say what I was going to say. I was a little skeptical that Muller was going to make this team better, which is to say they had Pedro Vite already in the attack, who was a very good MLS player, made Vancouver a nice chunk of change on his way down to Mexico. Vite was an incisive attacking player who brought decent enough defensive contribution. And Muller, at his age, I knew would be still a really good attacking player for reasons that Jeff has already said, MLS defending. I was worried that the bottom was going to fall out of Vancouver a little bit on the defensive end when they signed him. And I asked Jesper Sorensen about this for that same backfield piece I referenced. And he just kind of shrugged it off. He's like, he was very, very blunt, actually, Jesper Sorensen, which I appreciated. He basically said, yeah, I didn't think Pedro Vite was that good of a defensive player to begin with. So I'm not worried about Muller. That's a slight paraphrase. But he was like, yeah, we're not going to get worse in that spot. Like, Vite wasn't that great. I think Thomas is actually better at it, which I took with a grain of salt because that's the exact kind of thing you say about your new superstar who's now the most famous person on your team. But it's been true. Like, Muller, Jeff, you're 100% right. Muller has been fine defensively. He has not been a liability for them. Now, what I am concerned about for Thomas Muller, especially as it relates to Saturday, because that's all that matters, is he's not fit. He's not 100% fit anyway. He played 60 against San Diego. He played 90 against LAFC, which, let's remember, is not the full game. That game was heading into extra time. Muller wasn't on the field for the most important moments of that game. He is not healthy, clearly. He's dealing with muscular injuries right now. And he's not been that good in the last two games either. Like, he's still useful on the ball, but he has not been changing games like he did when he first arrived, where he was also dealing with some injuries, by the way. He's been good. He hasn't been great. Like if we're going to do a Messi versus Muller thing, that doesn't exist in this game. Messi is obviously in the category on his own when Muller is fully healthy and when he's 10 years younger. And he's neither of those things right now. So, I mean, when you look at the talent in this game, Miami clearly have the edge. Vancouver is much more about the collective, and Muller has been a useful part of that collective. He's played his part. He's still a good player, and he should still start in this game. But this is not the best version of Thomas Muller that we saw earlier on this year. This is a Thomas Muller at, it looks to me anyway, 80% or so. And that's still a good player, but it's maybe not a superstar in the way we might think.
All right, on that note, let's take one more break. We'll come back and we'll talk about the actual matchups, the tactics, the formations, all the things we expect to see, maybe see some key players as well. We'll get to it soon. Welcome back, everybody. We hope you never left. We hope you are as excited as we are for the MLS Cup final. However, based on what we've seen so far in the playoffs, combined with what we were talking about just before break, my assumption is that this game is going to be a lot of Miami on the ball and in possession, and Vancouver, at least for maybe the first half or so, holding on, defending as hard as they can, maybe trying to capitalize on set pieces. Is that roughly how you all see this game playing out?
Yeah, Taylor, I'm curious why it is that you think that, I suppose. Maybe some of it is obvious because Miami are Miami and they have Messi. Is that kind of your thinking?
I mean, so that is certainly a large part of it in terms of the way these playoffs have gone for Miami. 17-3 in terms of goals scored in 5 postseason games. They've won their last 3 by 4-goal margins. So it feels like you are coming up against an Inter Miami team that are in the strongest form possible, with Messi somehow even elevated from his regular season form, with them having found kind of new combinations that seem to be causing new levels of chaos for defenses. And then for Vancouver, by contrast, you have the injuries to Thomas Muller. You have not less squad depth, I would say, but like less difference makers in that squad. And so to me, it feels like that's kind of what you have to do, is rely on the team, rely on the hard work of the unit. And maybe that's not bunkering and holding on. Perhaps that's an unfair way to paint it. But I do think it is the squad sort of working collectively to try to nullify what Inter Miami will be throwing at you.
Yeah,
and I can see that, but I think that when you look at Vancouver this year, a lot of teams will have that second look of themselves when they go on the road, right? And the idea is that at home is when we can play our most ideal state, which means that we're taking more of the ball, and when we're away from home, we know the other team's trying to do that, so what can we do with less of it? Well, when you look at a 38-game sample of MLS games, they had 55% or so, 54% of possession when they were at home. But then it was only about 51 when they're on the road. They still do want to keep the ball. And I think that one of the kind of key philosophies, tenets of Jesper Sorensen's system that he has here is, again, it's that idea that sometimes being courageous defending means keeping the ball. It means wanting to retain possession to frustrate your opponent and take touches off of their feet. Because with Miami, the more touches that they have, the more times Lionel Messi gets the ball at his feet, the more likely they are to beat you, the better chances that they have to do something that you simply cannot predict or defend. And that has been the story of his career. So I think Vancouver is set up really nicely to do that. Now, keep in mind, very different personnel when they met in the CONCACAF Champions Cup semifinal second leg, which was the leg that was in Fort Lauderdale. And at that point, I think Vancouver knew that they needed pretty much a draw or a win to be able to advance, and everyone assumed Miami had it. Miami scores in 9 minutes. Vancouver keeps 42% of possession that day, and they end up winning 3-1. So I think that they will be just fine as long as they get it into that 40-43% corridor. I think it's also going to be really crucial to see who scores first. And I know that that is such a cliche sort of talking point. I always kind of scoff at that. It's like, yeah, I'd probably like to score first too. But these are two teams that are very good at retaining leads. Like the two best teams in Major League Soccer pretty much this year, just in terms of how they were able to ensure that they didn't drop points. And they go about it in very different ways. For Miami, it is that technical prowess that we talked about. They know that they can play themselves out of pretty much any sort of defensive press. So what they're trying to do is encourage you to keep possession, try to do that thing where they force a turnover and then you crash the ball. But they have the players who can spray it over you and collect the ball, and they're going to go on fast breaks. They continue to attack direct. With Vancouver, it is to still try to tilt the field. Only one team in MLS had a higher field tilt when they were winning than the Vancouver Whitecaps. But the Vancouver Whitecaps were one of two teams in MLS soccer to have over 50%. So they will still try to keep the ball on their side of the field and make it harder for you to get to the side of the field where you can change the game state. And I think that makes for like a really good sort of matchup where both sides will be very confident if they're ahead, both sides will be very confident if they're behind. I just think for Vancouver, it's got to be the teams that do best against Miami are the teams that continue to play good team soccer. Right. Yeah. And it's not the idea that you're going to go hero to hero against Messi. This is kind of what Cincinnati did. And Evander's just not going to be able to hang at the same level as Messi if the rest of the game is set up in a very cohesive way. But Vancouver isn't reliant on that one guy. I think that there's a case where maybe having Mueller not able to go 90 minutes and not having Gold able to go 90 minutes will help them in a weird way to be the mentality monsters that they'll need to be to get through this. I don't think it's, even if they have less possession, all of this to say, I think that they're going to be really comfortable with that. And I think that they're actually built to do a lot more with that than you would see with other teams in this position.
Yeah, I think Vancouver are going to press in this game. They pressed Miami in the first game of the semifinals of CCC early on. It just maybe didn't seem like that because they were leading for all but 23 minutes of those 180 minutes, right? So after that, Jesper Sorensen is, I think at his core, sort of a pragmatic manager, but a modern pragmatic manager, which is to say he's thinking through these things in a more accurate or like more statistically based kind of way, where his form of pragmatism is, we're under pressure in our own third. The obvious answer, the safe answer, the pragmatic answer is not necessarily just to boot the ball long and create a 50-50. If we can string 90% likelihood of pass completions together, well, that's a better odd than just hitting the 50-50. Like that's the example that he walked me through, right? So that's how Sorensen is thinking. He's trying to string together these logical progressions of how each decision is going to impact the next one. I think he's a fascinating character in that way. So he is pragmatic, which is to say, if Vancouver do take a lead, I would expect them to drop their line a little bit, right? I mean, I think there are some of those more measured decisions that are going to be made. But there's a lot of evidence, I think, that says Vancouver are going to play their game, which is they're one of the 6th most possession-y teams in MLS this year. That's an official stats-y term, possession-y. That's a good one. They were one of the 8-ish most aggressive pressing teams this year based off of both PPDA and average height of their defensive actions. They did it already against Miami, and that's the example I gave earlier. And they did it against San Diego just less than a week ago now, right? I mean, just a few days ago. If you go and press San Diego on the road, San Diego, the heaviest build-up team in MLS, I think you go and press Miami on the road, right? Where you're pressing Maxi Falcone and Noah Allen and Rocco Rios Novo, the legend, right? But like, I'd rather press those guys than press San Diego's dudes, you know? And San Diego, with how they play, they're so committed to that. And Vancouver pressed them and were dominant with their press in that game. So I would expect Vancouver to come at them. I think the real question is when Vancouver extend and when Miami do the same on the other way, because I think this is going to be a pretty even game in the early stages. Who gets the better of the opponent's press, right? Vancouver will press. They are, even though they are pressing Noah Allen and Max Falcone and Rios Novo. They're also pressing Busquets and Alba and Messi, right? Like 3 of the greatest passers, three of the greatest passers, including the greatest passer this sport has ever seen in that group.
There you go.
That's not easy to do. Can they do it effectively? And on the flip side, Miami have pressed quite well in the postseason so far. I went back and rewatched their 5-1 win over NYCFC. NYCFC almost never broke Miami's press. Like, literally, I don't think they truly broke it once in that game. If it was broken, Inter Miami fouled and got numbers back behind the ball. It was wild to me how well Miami pressed, frankly. And they've done it now in 3 straight games. They did it against NYCFC. They did it against Cincinnati. They did it against Nashville. 3 different teams of varying levels of attacking quality, none as good as Vancouver. Will Miami be able to press Vancouver in a way that looks cohesive? Or will Vancouver find the way through Miami's man-oriented press? Can they send runners behind the ball, off the ball? Can they move Peralta forward and have him receive on the run facing forward and have that break Miami's structure? I think how these teams try to break the other's press is probably the right question rather than which one might press. Obviously, MLS Cup is MLS Cup. It's one game, so these teams could decide to create a unique game plan. We saw that with the Galaxy last year. But the Galaxy were missing their best player, and these teams aren't.
Do you have a theory, Joe, on how each team is most likely to try to break the press? If you're watching, what are you looking for most readily?
I think Vancouver will try to do what I just mentioned, which is if Miami go man-to-man, which I expect that they will, right? Miami aren't really pressing goal kicks so much in the postseason. They are more pressing. They're kind of setting their line of confrontation at the top from their perspective, like the edge. I guess that's the bottom edge, actually. The bottom edge of the attacking third, right? So think about them setting it at the very cusp there of the edge of the middle third and the bottom of the final third. That's more where they've been setting their line. So they're not necessarily going to press goal kicks, but they will press Vancouver, I think, when Vancouver are in their 3-2 build-up structure, right? Which is where one of the fullbacks stays deep, you have the double pivot, and you go and play from there. That's almost always how Vancouver build when they're a little bit higher up in their own half. And when they're in that shape, Vancouver, Miami can match up front 3 to back 3. They can match up 2 number 8s to Vancouver's, their double pivot, and then you're man-to-man the rest of the way. That's how they've done it now in 3 straight games against 3 teams that build like Vancouver. And all these teams are using that same 3-2 build-up shape. So I would expect there's going to be a lot of man-oriented stuff going on, barring a tactical change from Mascherano, which is possible, but I think unlikely. In that situation, the man-to-man matchups fall into place really nicely. You're sort of right on top of each other. I think the biggest weakness that you have in a man-oriented press is you don't have any cover. Right, that's the whole thing. So if your runner gets behind you, you don't have cover. You don't have a zonal defender coming to shade towards you to give you some help. Cincinnati broke Miami's press, I think, basically once in the first 20 minutes of their game. And they did it by sending Pavel Buka, half of their double pivot, in a role relatively equitable to the one Berhalter's going to play. And they sent him forward off the ball. He received after slipping behind Baltazar Rodriguez, the left center mid for Miami, and progressed from there. And all of a sudden, in the blink of an eye, the ball was on Evander's foot. Now, again, Evander's not Messi, as Jeff said, but that's still a pretty good outcome for Cincinnati in that moment. I think that's how Vancouver tried to break Miami's press, is to send runners in behind. And Miami break Vancouver's press ideally by finding Messi and Busquets in the pockets, right? By moving those players off the ball and breaking through that way. Or, and this is the wrinkle that I think Miami really have, you find one of those players and Allende is off to the races, man. Like his timing off the ball, his off-ball runs are really good. And Ahmed and Savi can do some of that for Vancouver. I don't know that they're quite as good at that specific thing as Allende is. So if they can find one of their elite passers and they can find Allende racing forward, that's trouble for Vancouver. And the way that Vancouver doing that via Sabi and Takioka against LAFC for their opening goal, right? I think it was. Just racing it behind, that's an option for Miami in a very real way. It is for Vancouver too, but Allende, I think, is the best at it that we're going to see on the field on Saturday.
Jeff, for you, are there any other key matchups you're looking forward to? Any individuals that you think could be the difference makers, aside from, say, that guy named Lionel Messi?
Yeah, and I think that's where you go from the Vancouver side. You're reliant right now on Emmanuel Sabi and Jaden Nelson, because I think that they have the ability to do, as Joe laid out, what Cincinnati and New York City did not really even bother doing, which is to try testing them over the back, Miami, and force them to kind of play honest rather than continue to just glom further upfield, because it was clear you were playing into their hand, right? And the idea that you stretch them, look, sometimes that's a decoy ball. Sometimes that is you'll get called offside or whatever, but at least now they're worried about it, right? And they have to think about it's in the back of their mind and they're going to change their decision-making. But Vancouver is really good at effectively playing that, especially when Sebastian Berhalter kind of loops the ball over to either of them, because both Sabi and Nelson are good at 2 very effective types of that run behind the back. And there's the one of them, which is the outlet, right? And that's the idea where you're pretty much just bombing straight down the wing. You'll collect the ball. You're still pretty far from goal. But now at this point, you're also far from defenders, and your teammates have time to advance so that they can get into the box, and then you pretty much create a crossing situation, right? A lot of teams will try to use it that way. It's a little less effective, but at least you're able to take the pressure off of your defense for a while. They're also really good at the more incisive version of it, where they're actually cutting infield, and they're going to be willing to take their own shot. And usually they will meet each other sort of running into the half spaces at a similar point if that ball is on. So they will have a running mate, even if they don't have a striker who is with them, whether it's Brian White or someone else who is in lockstep with them to able to get that. So they're very effective at using their balls behind the back. Miami is really bad at backpedaling defensively. I think that this maybe goes without saying, but we don't talk about their center backs a lot because their center backs are some of their most anonymous players, especially to scale for this squad. They're not very good when the ball gets over them, when they have to look up, look behind, and then start running and chase. They don't have the converging speed either, usually, to keep up, certainly with someone like Sabi or Nelson. So I think that for Vancouver, that's going to be crucial. And the more that you do that, the more that you frustrate Miami, the more that you kind of show one of the few things that they just can't do at this stage as constructed. And teams that have been doing that, whether it was, again, you go back to May, that's what Minnesota was doing when they beat them 4-1. That's what Orlando did the following week when they beat them 4-1 as well. Whether it was Tani Oluwaseyi or Martin Ojeda, it didn't matter. They were doing it in different ways. But the idea was to actually have someone go up, challenge them. And now Miami is just kind of playing in desperation mode. And that's when they start making worse decisions on the ball, is when they're behind, when they're struggling. So try to make them struggle, and that's the most effective way to do it. I think Vancouver is actually really well calibrated to give Miami that sort of scare that's kind of haunted them throughout the season.
Final question for you all. Any predictions for this one? Either scoreline predictions, goal scorer predictions, or very specific predictions that don't relate to the actual outcome, but maybe individual moments? Anything we want to throw out?
This is a general prediction, but I think this game is going to be awesome. Not just from a narrative perspective. Narratively, this is great. I think this game has a chance to Tutul Rahman, who's been around the MLS landscape for a long time, is a great follow on Blue Sky. He's talked a little bit about how he thinks this game has the chance to be the most viewed MLS Cup ever, with Messi and Muller and the international interest and all those things. You have Canada and the U.S. I think he's 100% right about that. I think this game, I have so much FOMO that I'm not going to be at this game. I'll just put it that way. I think it's going to be an awesome game. But also because of the on-field stuff. The things we talked about Vancouver being a team that will stick to their identity and try to play. The fact that they have so much talent. The fact that they're just a fun team to watch, man. And then you can say all the things about Miami, because Miami mostly can't do anything else, right? I think this game is going to defy the usual storyline, which is, we're always really excited about a final and then the game sucks. That's often how it goes. Less in MLS than, say, the Champions League or lots of other competitions.
100%.
But I think this game is going to rule. Last year's game was fine. Last year's Cup was fine. Wasn't a great game, all things considered. I think these are two of the three most entertaining teams in MLS. And I am so excited to watch this game.
Yeah, and I think it's also rare that you get teams that are this effective and good and not just like good but flawed, right?
Yeah.
Because I think that when you look at last year, like whether it was the Galaxy or the Red Bulls, they were good but they were flawed, right? And so it was a fun sort of matchup. But this is the second time since XG was really kind of brought into like MLS. So like 2017, I think, was the year that you start to see XG data on FBref. Maybe it was 2018. This is only the second time that the team with the best expected goal difference in each conference has made it. The other time was 2022 when LAFC beat Philadelphia, and that was a pretty good MLS Cup too. So
Decent.
Yeah, decent. That was one we were both at, I think. I think it's going to be a fantastic game. I think that this is probably the better venue for it because I think Vancouver travels better and looks more like its usual self away from home than Miami does. And honestly, I think that if they're the best storyline drivers in MLS, you want more of Messi on the ball. And so I think we will get a Messi moment, and that is such a lazy prediction because he just has done that for every big game in his career. But I don't think that we can discount that. But I think that it's also worth saying Vancouver knows that. Vancouver knows that there's just going to be something that happens, and they have to account for it. And I don't think that there's been a team that has been better at accounting for things not going right, whether it is between games with injuries or it is during games, than the Vancouver Whitecaps this year. I actually think Vancouver's going to win this. I really do.
Spicy.
And I don't think it's going to be a blowout. I don't think it's going to be this humiliating, but I'm getting 2009 vibes. And it's reminding me of David Beckham's first MLS Cup year, which was his third season. He arrived in the summer of 2007, so it's his second full season, third full season, same as Messi. They get to MLS Cup. They face a better team, Real Salt Lake, that year under Wonder Kid coach Jason Kreis, which is just such a funny relic of a sentence. And they lose on penalties. And that was one that was, of course, Landon Donovan hits the bar, and that's how it goes. But it just feels very similar. This is a team that is so close, but I think that there are still such clear flaws with this Miami team that Vancouver is built to exploit, that I think it'll be another one of those kind of instant classics, but yeah, I think the Caps have it.
And the crazy thing, I'm picking Miami in this game. I think they are playing the best ball we've ever seen an MLS team play right now. Like they are hitting a level in the attack that we've never seen an MLS team hit. And defensively, they're no longer tripping over themselves. Now, this is going to be their stiffest test on Saturday of the whole postseason, which is when they stop tripping over themselves. And I know Vancouver already beat them twice this year. I just think this version of Miami's better for the lineup reasons we talked about. Messi's in absurd form, and the players just seem to care now in the way that they didn't seem to care in those games in the CONCACAF run. But man, I can see it, Jeff. I hear where you're coming from, man. Like I was thinking about this game yesterday and wrote the preview that's up at Backfield right now, and Vancouver, there's a world. There are many worlds in which Vancouver, I think, not just win this game close. I think there are worlds in which they dominate this game.
Absolutely,
Vancouver are not bad at a single thing. They have no major weaknesses. They're in the 77th percentile or better in XG differential in set pieces, in open play, like sustained possession sequences, and in fast breaks. They're just good at everything. This team is unbelievably good at every single thing that you need to do in a soccer field to win games. The difference is Miami have the better players. And I don't know where that's going to put us. I have generally decided to stick with my original gut when the postseason started and to back Messi all the way through. But man, there are so many outcomes where Vancouver not just win a close game, but win this game by a lot. I can't pick against Miami at this stage.
So we could have a final in which there are lots of goals. We could have a cagey affair. I am also of the opinion that if it's like 0-0 at halftime, even if that might not make for the most engaging of game for the neutral, I think that sets things up really well. And I think that in itself is really interesting because it means that Miami haven't been able to kind of push through and get the goal that they tend to want to get in the first 30, 35 minutes. It means that Vancouver have nullified what Miami is doing. Maybe they're creating something of their own, but I think it sets a stage for the intensity and the pressure to be ratcheted up on both teams in that second half. And so even if it's scoreless at the break, I still think we might get some fireworks in that second half. So I feel like we are poised for hopefully a classic, hopefully an all-timer, hopefully not 0-0 and then penalties, and then we're discussing that on Sunday, which is when we will be back. We'll watch on Saturday, record on Sunday. I'm very excited for it. Gentlemen, thank you so much for all your previewing efforts. Jeff Reuter, thank you, my dear friend.
Thank you, Taylor Rockwell.
Joe D'Alba. Yep, I got that right? Joe D'Alba, thank you very much for your thoughts.
Should have gone Ralph Priestjo today, who's been awesome, by the way. Another Sorensen win, and credit to the young guy as well. Like, he's been so good and should start this game. Thanks, Taylor.
But you're picking against the Whitecaps, right?
I am. Yeah, I am.
Okay.
That's true. That much is true. Can't hide it.
I'm picking for the friends we made along the way.
Pick, Taylor. Pick right now. Pick right now. Pick right now. 3, 2, 1, pick.
I'll go Miami, though I will be rooting, so to speak, for Vancouver.
Nice. Fair enough.
Sure.
Yeah. For our
I'm
Canadian
sure they'll
brethren.
appreciate it. Yeah.
Everybody needs a villain. I like it.
Yep. All right, listeners, thank you all so much for your time and effort in listening to this one. I'm sure it was laborious. We look forward to breaking this game down for you on the weekend, but obviously many more shows still to come in the feed this week. For now, thanks again for listening. We'll talk to you very soon.